Hello friends, today we are going to have a full guided tour of Vasa Museum, which is located in Stockholm, a capital city of Sweden. This is a very famous museum which is built on the basis of biggest mistake made in the history of Sweden. Now you will of course wonder what is that biggest mistake. So you will get to know about it, but you have to watch this video till the end. The entry fee for this museum, which includes a guided tour and a movie show, is 170 Sweden kronas, which is almost equal to 15.15 euro.
The movie is 17 minutes long, so it's not very long, but you will have time to do the movie.
Okay.
And afterwards at 14:30 do the guided tour.
Guided tour takes
25-30 minutes.
Okay.
But otherwise what you also can do is we have an open and free Wi-Fi.
Okay.
You can scan this QR code, go to the webpage and then choose your desired language. And it's an audio guide that you can listen to. It's 45 minutes long.
Okay. And then we got these brochures which were in most of the languages including Hindi. After that we went to a film about Vasa.
Just before the movie start, let me tell you something about Vasa. Vasa was a Sweden warship ship which was built in 1628, and the ship sank into the sea just after sailing 1300 meters long.
In 1959, everything was ready for the first lift, and the Vasa hung free on her wire cradle. Thousands of holes left by rusted bolts had to be plugged, and new hatches fitted to the gun ports before she could float again. Monday, the 24th of April, 1961, was the great day. After 333 years, the Vasa would emerge from the sea. Thousands of people watched and millions more followed the saga on radio and TV in Sweden and abroad. Nothing seemed to happen, when suddenly a bit of a mast and a section of bulwark appeared above the waves. Soon, enough of the Vasa was above the water for Per Edvin Felting and Anders Franzén to board her. Pumps strained to empty the ship of water and mud to lighten her. The archaeologists now moved in. A marine excavation of this size on such an old ship was unprecedented anywhere in the world. One day, a full choir of angels emerged, sculptures from a sumptuous cabin fitted out like royal apartments. There would be over 40,000 finds in total by the end. The Vasa was towed past the site of her sinking, just 100 meters off Beckholmen. As majestically as in the 17th century, she glided into the dock with a slight list. The interior of the ship opened a whole new world to historians. The Vasa contained a complete 17th century society, unique in the world. A time capsule where everything was unchanged from that fateful afternoon in August 1628. The sculptures had survived their immersion well and were placed in huge vats of water awaiting restoration. The hull of the Vasa had to be constantly sprayed with water to prevent the wood drying out. The Vasa sank rapidly in just a few minutes, a ladder came away as Admiral Erik Jönsson Kramer tried to reach the upper deck. A ring, the sole goal object to come to light, was found on the orlop deck. Did the Admiral lose it as he tried to save himself in the final minutes? But many below deck had no chance as the Vasa sank. This sailor was trapped under a cannon. The brackish water, low in oxygen, and the mud have preserved his clothing, and his shoes were still on his feet. Even his hair and brain were preserved in the cold depths. Parts of 15 skeletons have been recovered, allowing scientists to establish what they ate and what illnesses the seamen suffered from. This bronze brazier, found at the lowest part of the hull, kept the officers' food warm. These expensive objects were manufactured in Germany. During the hearing by the council, the interrogating officer wondered whether the cannons had not been properly secured. He was wrong. They had been. All the gun carriages were still in place on the lower decks. The cannons had not caused the ship to capsize. She was just too high and too narrow in the beam, with too little weight in the stone ballast below the waterline. The painstaking work of preserving the hull for posterity began. For more than 17 years until 1979, the Vasa was sprayed with polyethylene glycol, as is found in lipsticks and skin cream, to replace the water in the wood. The Vasa is one of the largest objects ever conserved. She has been called the world's biggest jigsaw puzzle, and to find out where all the loose parts had fitted, the museum's carpenters threaded steel wire through the old nail holes. If they lined up, a new piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Down in the hold, the 17th century still lies undisturbed. The skill of the shipwrights who joined these massive timbers and the stout planking can still be admired. Vasa's sides are almost 60 centimeters thick to withstand the enemy's shot. Right forward, the thick anchor cable was attached. In the stern castle, everything fitted perfectly. Many of the Vasa's blocks, deadeyes, and a top survived. And these have been used with 4 kilometers of new rope for shrouds and stays when the ship was re-rigged. The Vasa is unique. No other ship of this size and age has been preserved anywhere in the world, and she is 98% original. The 18-meter-high transom is covered in sculptures, a unique art treasure. A truly impressive ship designed to strike fear into the enemy. The German artist Morten Rettmer and his assistants carved more than 700 sculptures. The lion's mouth still shows its red paint. The whole ship was to gleam in gold and bright colours, as fashion dictated in the 17th century. How long will we have the Vasa? Not forever. But everything possible is being done to preserve this old ship for as long as possible. This includes reducing the rust that has penetrated the wood. The old temporary iron bolts are being replaced by new ones in stainless steel. A task that will take many years. It is quite a thought that if this floating palace had only sailed well, we would not have her today.
Then after the movie, we started our guided tour.
You don't have to be shy, you can be closer. I don't fight. And also it's good so that people can walk past behind you. Alright then, so welcome to the Vasa Museum. My name is Elin and I will be your guide for the next 25 minutes. That I hope will function as a form of introduction or crash course into the history of Vasa. It's impossible to cover every aspect of Vasa within 25 minutes, so just bear that in mind. Also, bear in mind that this guided tour will last almost as long as Vasa managed to sail. So you'll have a timeline of disaster as we go together through this museum. Now, what I like to think about Vasa is that she is, at the moment, a 800 or 900 ton heavy historical object that in many ways is a symbol of a fascinating yet also problematic time period in Swedish history. The era of great power spans from at some point in the 16th century up until the early 18th century. So a little bit more than 100 years. It is fascinating if you're interested in different processes in regards to state formation in Sweden. This is the century when the army and the tax system, postal service, everything that is related to centralization and the bureaucratization of the state begins. It is problematic because it's the only time when Sweden tried but also succeeded in becoming an empire centered around the Baltics. What that means on a practical level are several, but one has to do with geography. You need to imagine Stockholm as being in the center of an empire that surrounds the Baltic Sea. So therefore, everything that relates to the Baltic Sea in terms of war or trade or what is often a mixture between those two was a way to tie the state together. Whilst nowadays, Stockholm is on the eastern outskirts of the state. It is also problematic because at several points throughout the century, it is estimated that 1 out of 4 men born in this state died in relation to war. mainly diseases that follows battles. So it's also referred to as the era of soldiers' widows. Right, so Vasa was built because of a very typical conflict in the 17th century. It was a war, a family feud about power and religion. So, let's begin with one of the main characters of this conflict. The Lion of the North. That was the nickname of Gustavus Adolphus, the King of Sweden. He had a cousin named Sigismund III, and he was not only the king over the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, but he was in fact the rightful heir of the Swedish throne. He had been dethroned after a coup because of the fact that he was Catholic. And Sweden had been, for the last century, very Protestant. So that was the reason why Vasa was built. And she was built here in Stockholm, on the shipyard that used to be Stockholm's largest working place. That meant that 300 or 400 people were working there. One thing I like to mention is the fact that the shipyard could only function with a well-developed international trade and exchange of knowledge and workforce. So for example, if we want to build Vasa, we need a couple of things. About 12 kilometers of rigging or cordages and different kinds of ropes. They were made with hemp from Russia. And you make them waterproof by treating them with tar from Sweden or nowadays what is Finland. And sailcloth from different countries in Europe. We have the smallest sail on display on floor 6. Bear in mind that it is the smallest sail because it's larger than my apartment. Yeah, and you need to take that times 4 to get to the larger sails. So a lot of cloth. Then we have the hull itself. It's made of oak. There's no better wood than oak if you want to build wooden ships. And some of it was brought from a woman called Brita Båt here in Sweden, and which is kind of interesting because båt means boat or ship in Swedish. So I'm not sure whether it's a coincidence or, but she delivered oak to the shipyard. However, some of the oak was also brought from our enemies in Poland via Dutch merchants in Amsterdam. So you trade with your enemy to fight your enemy. So if there's something I want you to bring from this guided tour, if anything, is that war and trade as interlinked in a complicated way is nothing new. Vasa is a proof of that. And speaking of the Dutch, we'll have to acknowledge that there is no Swedish history in the 17th century without some Dutch people involved. And in this case, we have Henrik Hubertsson. He was the shipmaster. And a lot of the skilled timber workers who built Vasa was also from the Dutch Republic. There are more than 700 sculptures on Vasa. So they tried to build a war machine. They failed rather epically, but they made a propaganda machine. Because every single sculpture on Vasa carries a meaning that relates to power. And they were carved by a group of Germans here in Stockholm. Finally, we have Medardus Jesus. He was a Swiss-born, German, Latvian, European kind of guy. And he was in charge of making the bronze cannons for Vasa. And we have reasons to get back to him later on. But first, I need to mention the 10th of August in 1628. According to witnesses, it was a rather fine summer's day. It was also a Sunday, so everyone had been to church before it was time to set sail. And Vasa went on her maiden voyage that also came to be her last voyage. So as she passed this island, Djurgården, and yet another smaller island called Beckholmen, Pitch Island, because you produced pitch there. there was a wind that struck Vasa, and she started to heave towards the port side. So we're standing on the starboard side, so imagine her tilting the other way. And the thing is that we've left the gun ports open to illustrate that they were open then as now. Cannons were sticking out because you need to shoot salute when a ship like this leaves its harbor. So therefore water rushed in through the gun ports. It took a couple of minutes and then Vasa was no more. And there she remained on the seabed for 333 years until she was salvaged in 1961 and eventually brought into this museum. Do we have any questions so far? There are no stupid questions, that's important. You can try, but you will not
Was it
impress
a
me.
common problem to have like water go in through the cannon side if the ship had, so couldn't they foresee this kind of problem? Or?
Well, normally that's not a problem.
Okay.
The thing is that Vasa was a little bit badly built. We're quite a lot of people here, but I still want to go upstairs to floor 6. So either you follow me or you take the elevator that is behind the stairs. Alright, let's gather around here. Regarding your question, was there like ongoing issues that water would rush in through the gun ports? I would lie to you if I said yes or no. I don't know exactly. Maybe, but not to the extent that, like in Vasa's case, that it would sink because of it. The problem was that Vasa was top heavy. You know how stability, its form and weight, and especially how that weight is distributed within a body. Now, with that said, there's a couple of ingredients that make the Vasa disaster, so to speak. So first of all, she's a little bit narrow, yes, but she's not outrageously narrow. Her sister ship, Äpplet, or the Apple, that we found a couple of months ago, sailed for 30 years rather than 30 minutes. And she was 1 meter and 20 or 30 centimeters broader. So there's a fine line, about 1 meter, between success and failure. And you can't see that difference in 1 meter on a vast object such as Vasa. The second aspect has to do with the cannons. Now, Vasa was in fact, during her short time as a sailing ship, Europe's, but perhaps also the world's heaviest armed ship. I mentioned Medard de Jesus earlier, and he had been ordered by Gustavus to make 72 cannons. He only managed to make 64. We have 3 of them left here in the museum. The rest were actually salvaged in the 1660s. Can you see over there on the other side of the museum? Yeah. That's 2 of the cannons. So on the Vasa there were smaller cannons and there were larger ones, but that's a good average. And these 2 24-pound cannons, they weigh, with their gun carriage, 1.5 tons. So 64 cannons on top of a narrow base. This is where it starts to get dangerous. The last ingredient is something I can't show you here because we're not allowed to go on board. You'll have to win a Nobel Prize to do that, or be a friend of our king. But on the other side of the museum, on floor 5, there's a replica of the great cabin and the upper gun deck. Now, when you walk through the upper gun deck, you will notice that if you're about as high as I am 1 meter and 69 or 5'7". You can walk through the upper gun deck without smashing your head into a wooden beam. In short, that should not be the case. In a lot of warships, you had to duck between the beams and stand upright between. So, if they would have lowered the ceiling, it's not just a heavy oak, but of course all of these cannons and their weight that would have been redistributed. So that's why Vasa sank. Do we have any questions so far on that? Or anything else for that matter? Could be completely unrelated. No? Well then, before we end, I want to show you the transom of the ship. So we'll need to make a little power walk to the stern side of the ship. Follow me.
What a beautiful ship.
All right. Yeah.
Was it unusual for the front of a ship to be curved like that, so pointy and curved?
I wouldn't say so. Again, it's a little bit narrow. It is built in the Dutch style. So if you want to simplify and generalize, you have the Dutch way of building ships that were dominant in this time period, or basically during the Dutch Golden Age. And then the English way of building ships became more dominant. But I'd say that she's representative as a ship in regards to that we can find out a lot about what material they used. Ships would be the floats. And they're almost like pear-shaped. So they're way more broader, and that's why they can be quite, they don't have to go that deep down into the water.
Yeah.
They could be quite shallow. Did that help?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. The transom. So the purpose and the function of a transom is that it should function as a sort of ID. By looking at it, you should understand whose ship it is and what sort of purpose it has. So from top to bottom, a man is being crowned by two griffins. The man is Gustavus himself, and the two griffins it's a symbol of his father Karl. It's part of his heraldic image gallery, you might say. And just a quick note, we have very few sources, written ones, about the sculptures. So we have to apply some sort of a probability, like a professional guessing. So we don't know exactly, but we think that this is supposed to represent the people of Sweden. And what I like about that idea is that if you take his body language into consideration, it shows that sort of duality that an absolute war king in the 17th century would sort of impersonate. Because as such, Gustavus had given the promise to protect his subjects. But he also had been given the privilege of dominating them. Again, sending them to war. I think it shows on his body language. G-A-R-S, it's Latin. Gustavus Adolphus Rex Suecia, so Gustavus Adolphus, the King of Sweden. These are some of the few letters you will find on the ship. The other ones are to be found where we actually started this tour. So the Roman emperors that you might have seen, like on the sort of, they were named. You can't see that now, but they are named. More lions mean more of Gustavus in many ways. What I like about these ones is that they're well preserved. For example, this one, you can still see the red color inside of his mouth. So these sculptures that we just passed by are fascinating because they're the result of a research project where they made color tests to see how Vasa was actually painted. There was this idea when she was salvaged in the 1960s that she would have been a lot of blue and gold, like the Swedish flag. But that's just a way of looking at history through your 19th century glasses. So that was not the case. This is important, and it's the same like this one. So, can you see that from the high, or this? It's a bundle of grains. It's an ancient symbol of power, because food is safety, is wealth, and power. So it's been known for being used in the Roman Empire. So, for example, it's called a fasces, and a fasces attached to an axe was the symbol of the Roman Empire and everything related to their law. Later on, you might say it was abused by the fascists. I think you can find it, it's a symbol for the US tax court as well. So it's well spread symbol. Fasces in Latin turned into Vasa in Old Swedish. Gustavus was part of the Vasa dynasty. So this whole ship has its name because it's a tribute to his family and his dynasty. And what I find interesting about it is that he wanted to create a symbol for his state and his dynasty, and then his daughter completely went the opposite way. And that has to do with these symbols. Now, these puttis or angels or cherubs, whatever you prefer to call them, are carrying olive branches. Olive branches symbolizes peace. And this is how you know that this is a warship. Because the idea is that you need to pursue war in order to create peace. And that's what Gustavus thought he did when he entered the 30 Years' War, fighting against the Catholics. And the thing is that I mentioned with his daughter, Christina, that took over the throne when he died in the Battle of Lützen in 1632, was that instead of fighting the Catholics, she actually decided to become one and abdicate and move to Rome and live her best life as such. So there's this great contrast between father and daughter that of course they didn't know about with Vasa, but it's interesting to reflect upon when you look at this. And of course, in regards to religious wars, religious symbols. These are the Gideon warriors. And if you know your Bible, then you would know what they symbolize is that idea that you can defeat your enemies by using your intelligence or wit. Clever warriors. Of course, this needs to be matched with some muscle power, and that's where these knights come into the picture. In Sweden at the time, there was this idea called Gothicism. You have variations of that all over Europe. But the Swedish Gothicism was that Swedish people was the direct descendants of the Goths that managed to fight back the Romans. And since the Vasa dynasty was newcomers on the royal scene, especially in comparison to other royal houses in Europe, they had to use something to legitimize their power. And that they did by, for example, using a little bit of 17th century fake history. So that's what they are examples of. We also have King David down there, so that ties to the religious theme. And what I would say in general is that what this shows is that in a society where far from everyone could read or write, it makes sense that you need to have a strong symbolical language. Do we have any final questions? Yeah.
What was the king's reaction to this disaster, and what did they do to the man who built the ship?
Well, Gustavus was not happy about it, but how to say, we add value to Vasa because we can see it. We can almost touch it. But they were building other ships on the shipyard. So yeah, it cost a lot and it was a disaster, but they had to just move forward and make a new ship instead. Again, in regards to who was blamed, the short answer to that is that no one was blamed. Partly because Henrik Hybertsson, the shipmaster, had actually died prior to Vasa's finalization. His wife, Margareta Nilsdotter, she was already in charge of the economical matters on the shipyard, but she took over the rest when he died. And the only thing that really happened to her was that she ended up with debts that the state did not pay her. So yeah, there was economical consequences, but no one was held responsible. In fact, most of the people that worked with Vasa ended up having really good careers. Instead, I think they kind of agreed that this was a mistake done by everyone. It was a team failure.
I have a question.
Yeah?
How many days or months it took to recover this from the sea?
So they did not find her. They confirmed that it was Vasa. They had always known that there was a wreck where Vasa was. They just didn't know what kind of wreck it was. But they found her in 1957 and she broke the surface in 1961. After that, she was sprayed with polyethylene glycol. You will find it in your skin creams for some odd reason. For 17 years. Because you need to substitute the water that has penetrated the wood with something. And that something is that polyethylene glycol. And then you had to... sometimes Vasa is referred to as the world's worst puzzle. Because every sculpture, almost everyone, had fallen off. So you need to find out like where they should go. And that's why in some places there's empty spaces, because we need to know what sculpture should go where. So we don't add anything unless we're certain. So, and she's sinking yet a second time. That's why we need to build a new sort of a fundament and an internal skeleton, you might say. So I'd say raising her took 3 years or 4 years, but to keep her raised continues to this very day. So it's an ongoing issue. And that's why we don't salvage ships anymore. And that's why we have the Museum of Wrecks. They're trying to tell the story about every single other thing, whether it being living sites or ships underneath the water that is still there. Anything else?
See the sword there?
Which one?
The sword that he's holding. This down at the
Yeah.
Would that have been accurate? Would he have been holding an actual sword
Yes.
during the maiden voyage?
Yes. Did I mention that Vasa is 98% original?
Yes.
Okay, she is. But what's not original is mainly the weather deck, because they smashed it so they could salvage the cannons that were underneath. Everything that has this light brown color is not original. And this is very original, but it also had really good nails because it hasn't fallen off and into the mud and being preserved in comparison to these ones, for example. So that's why this looks very abstract. But as you can see, his arm has, even though it's fallen off, it does have that sort of angle where it should go forward. So again, this has to do with probability. We have estimated that it's reasonable to think that this soldier that is wearing this sort of Roman gear would carry a sword. Because we've seen that in similar sculptures. But again, that's a great example of where we just... Again, since there's research ongoing on this museum, if you come back 10 years later, we might have found that he was holding something completely different. And then we need to adjust it. Same with facts. What I say now might be proven wrong in the future. And you have great questions, and I talk too much, and we need to end now. But if you have any other questions, just contact us in the information desk. We're here for you. Make sure you have a lovely day here, or evening in the museum, afternoon. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Tack.
This was an end to the story of Vasa. Please comment down below what are your thoughts and opinion about the big giant ship called Vasa. If you like this video, please hit the like button, please share it to your friends and family, and also subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Till then, bye bye.